Nobody prepares you for the quiet kind of ending. The world has very good language for dramatic heartbreak, the betrayal, the explosion, the irreparable thing that was said. There are whole genres of music built around that kind of grief, whole sections of bookstores. There are people who will understand you instantly when you describe it. But there's another kind of ending, one that doesn't have a villain, one where both people behaved well and tried hard and genuinely cared, and it still didn't work. Not because something broke, because nothing ever fully caught fire. And that grief, nobody has the right words for it, because it doesn't fit the story we've been given about love. It doesn't fit the story of tragedy or betrayal or toxic attachment. It's something quieter and, I think, far more common and far more lonely to carry. This is a video about that grief and the strange, complicated nature of a love that was real, just not enough. And I realize now, the person I'm thinking about wasn't perfect, but they were, and I mean this in the most disarming way possible, exactly who they needed to be. Compassionate, perceptive, weird in a way that only ever made them more beautiful. The kind of person who always seemed to know just what to say. And I realize now, with the particular clarity that only distance provides, that I spent a long time in that relationship not really seeing them as a full person. I had built a version of them in my head, invincible, radiant, almost fictional, a force of nature that organized my happiness around itself. And then one day, in a quiet moment, I accidentally saw something real, something human and vulnerable and frightened. And the fictional version disappeared. And what I found underneath was somehow more astonishing. A real person, with real fear, with real fragility inside all that apparent strength. And for a moment, for a genuinely beautiful moment, that felt like the beginning of something. It wasn't. Or rather, it was the beginning of the truth, which is that we cared for each other, genuinely. And the caring was never going to be enough. And some part of us both always knew that. And we built something anyway, and called it love. And maybe we were wrong about what to call it, and maybe we weren't. That's what I want to think about today. What that kind of love actually is, whether it was love at all, and why losing it, a thing you were never entirely sure of, can feel like losing something enormous. The ancient Greeks didn't have one word for love. They had at least 6, and understanding the difference between them might be the most clarifying thing you encounter today, if you've ever stood in the ruins of a relationship that couldn't quite be defined. Eros, erotic, passionate love. The kind that arrives like a physical force, that reorganizes your perception of the world, that can feel, and the Greeks were not being metaphorical, like a form of madness. Philia, the love of deep friendship, of mutual respect and shared experience, the bond that forms between two people who have been through something together and emerged on the other side more committed to each other's flourishing. Pragma. This is the one that almost nobody talks about. Pragma is the love that endures. The love built not on passion or friendship alone, but on a shared decision, a daily commitment, an act of will that two people perform over and over across years. The philosopher Erich Fromm described it not as a feeling, but as a practice, something you do, not something you fall into. Ludus, playful love, the early, light, unserious pleasure of someone new. The version of love that lives in laughter and teasing and the effortlessness of the beginning. Agape, the deepest, most universal love, unconditional, Not relational in the sense of requiring specific reciprocity. The love that wishes well for another regardless of what is received in return. And storge, the quiet, unromantic love of familiarity, of belonging, of knowing that someone is simply there in your life and feeling the rightness of it without any drama. Now, here is the thing that should stop you. Almost every relationship you will ever be in will contain several of these, but rarely all of them. And the specific combination you have determines almost everything about what the relationship is, what it can be, and what will eventually defeat it. What I had, what I think a great many people have had, without being able to name it, was something that was genuinely rich in philia, in storge, perhaps in some measure of pragma, maybe even a glimpse of agape. But eros, the fire, never fully arrived, or arrived briefly and then quietly departed, like a guest who was never planning to stay. And nobody ever tells you a love without eros is still love. It just cannot, for most people, bear the full weight of a life. The Japanese have a concept called koi no yokan. It has no direct English translation. It describes the feeling, upon meeting someone, that falling in love with them is inevitable. Not that you are in love, but that you will be. The premonition of love before it arrives. I've been thinking about this concept and its shadow because I think there's an equally nameless experience on the other end of the timeline. Not the premonition of love arriving, the slow, heartbreaking recognition that it isn't going to. Not that the person is wrong, not that the relationship is bad, but that this specific love, however warm, however real, however full of genuine tenderness, is missing something fundamental that cannot be installed. That you can be completely committed to someone and deeply fond of someone and choose them every morning and still know in a place beneath conscious thought that the thing that would make this permanent is not present and may never be. The Buddhists have a related concept, dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more precisely, the existential dissatisfaction of impermanence. The specific ache of knowing that even the things you love will change or leave, or simply cease to be what they were. Not because anything went wrong, but because impermanence is the fundamental nature of all things. Every relationship I've ever seen end without a villain, without betrayal, without cruelty, has ended because of this. The slow accumulation of the recognition that what was here was real and temporary, and that those two things were never in contradiction. There's a moment that happens after someone has been genuinely woven into your daily life, and then isn't anymore. Something funny happens, something stupid, something small and perfect. And before you've made a conscious decision, your hand is already moving toward your phone, already composing the message to them. And then the recalibration, the almost physical sensation of a reflex meeting a closed door. This is not sentimentality. This is neuroscience. When we form close relationships, particularly romantic ones, our brains don't just store memories of the person. They incorporate the person into our neural architecture. The predictive systems that run most of our behavior, the systems that build models of the world and anticipate what comes next, include that person in their model. They become a variable in the equation of daily life, an expected presence, a regular input. When the relationship ends, the memories don't simply disappear. The neural pathways don't simply close. The brain continues to run the patterns, continues to generate the impulse to share, to communicate, to reach. Because those patterns were built over hundreds of small interactions, repeated thousands of times. You can't delete architecture. You can only let it slowly become unused. Let the signals gradually find nothing on the other end. And feel, every single time, the specific small grief of that. The neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman has written that social pain, the pain of separation, of loss, of exclusion, activates the same neural regions as physical pain. The brain processes them through overlapping systems. When you say that missing someone is a physical feeling, you are not being poetic. You are being precise. And perhaps more striking, research on attachment suggests that the length of the recovery period after a relationship ends is not primarily correlated with how good the relationship was. It's correlated with how deeply integrated the other person became in your daily behavioral patterns, how thoroughly they were woven into the fabric of ordinary time. Which means sometimes the most painful losses are not the most passionate loves. Sometimes they're the loves that were simply consistent, present, woven in. There's a question nobody asks directly when they're in this situation, because asking it out loud makes it too real. Why do we stay in relationships we know on some level are incomplete? The easy answer is fear. Fear of aloneness, fear of the loss of what is genuinely good, fear of hurting someone we care about. All of that is real. But I think there's something more honest than fear underneath it. I think we stay because we are genuinely uncertain, because the evidence is genuinely mixed, because there are real days, real weeks, when it feels like exactly enough, when the warmth is sufficient, when the companionship is everything, when the word love seems not only applicable, but accurate. And then there are other days when you find yourself sitting in the same room as someone and feeling not unhappy, but somehow absent. When you realize that you have been performing intimacy slightly more than experiencing it. When you notice that the conversations are good, but the silence between them feels like something you're managing rather than something you're sharing. Psychologists call this ambivalent attachment. And what research consistently shows is that ambivalence, not negativity, but ambivalence, is one of the most stressful cognitive states a human being can sustain. The uncertain relationship is harder to bear than the clearly good one or the clearly bad one, because the mind cannot resolve its model, cannot settle into either acceptance or departure. The month before a relationship like this ends, both people often describe the same experience, a kind of exhausted clarity. The ambivalence finally collapses into something more honest. Not better, just more honest. And the ending, when it comes, carries that specific quality, a shared, painful relief. Two people standing in a doorway, not angry at each other, just finally done carrying the uncertain. And then you're single, and everyone assures you that this is freedom. So you do what people do. You date, you go out, you fill the calendar. Maybe out of actual desire to meet someone. Maybe out of a vaguely principled idea that the way forward is through experience. Maybe, and this is the one nobody admits, just because the alternative is a quiet apartment that seems to have acoustics specifically designed for hearing your own thoughts. And you meet people. Many people. Some of them are objectively lovely, attractive, interesting, perfectly functional as human beings in every observable category. And you find yourself, and I want to be honest about how strange this feels, almost completely indifferent to their interiority. You exchange pleasantries about your lives, you share opinions about things, and you drive home afterward, and none of it has touched you. Not even slightly. There's a French philosophical concept, and I'm going to slightly abuse it for this purpose, called metro boulot dodo, the numbing rhythm of daily life. Commute, work, sleep. What I'm describing is the emotional equivalent, a kind of relational metro boulot dodo. Swipe, meet, forget. Swipe, meet, forget. Not living, just moving, filling time in the shape of living, while the real inner work of grieving goes unaddressed underneath all the activity. Meanwhile, and this is the thing that's hardest to admit, the person you just left keeps finding you at the most inopportune moments, in the middle of something mundane, in the space between one thought and the next, at 2 a.m. The silence becomes, as someone once put it to me, all too much. Not because you want them back, not exactly, but because they represented something that all these new faces and names don't. The honor and meaning of having been genuinely known by someone. The feeling of being on a team, of building something, even if what you were building was never entirely clear. Even if you're not sure you'd go back. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude that every major philosophical tradition has noticed and that modern life consistently refuses to honor. Loneliness is the pain of being alone when you don't want to be. It's relational deprivation. It's real and it's painful, and it shouldn't be dismissed. But solitude, genuine solitude, is something else entirely. The philosopher Paul Tillich wrote that language has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and the word solitude to express the glory of being alone. The same condition, two entirely different relationships. What I've noticed, and what I think is worth saying aloud, is that the period after a relationship like this ends is one of the most uncomfortable invitations to solitude that a person can receive. Because the relationship, however incomplete, was very effective at insulating you from having to sit with yourself, from having to reckon with the specific questions that only silence asks. And there's an indignity to it, initially. Being single doesn't feel like solitude. It just feels like a smaller life, a louder bed, conversations that stop too early, that excruciating social recalibration of being a person without a person. But underneath all of that, if you don't sprint toward distraction, something else is available. The slow, often uncomfortable rediscovery of your own interior. Who you are when you're not being half of something. What you actually want. What you actually feel. I want to return to the question I started with. Was it love? Was that the warm, imperfect, insufficient, genuinely tender thing that ended without a villain? Was that love? I spent a long time thinking the answer had to be no. That love, by definition, must be the thing that lasts. The thing that can bear the full weight of a life. The thing that, as one tradition has it, is predestined and arrives at first sight and makes everything else look small in comparison. And there is something true in that. The love that endures, that deepens across decades, that becomes, in Khalil Gibran's image, not two people standing close together, but two pillars holding up the same temple. That is a thing of extraordinary power and beauty. I believe in it, but I've stopped believing that it's the only thing that qualifies. I think there are loves that are real and complete in themselves, even if they don't last. Not consolation prizes for the love that didn't survive. Not practice runs for the real thing. But genuine expressions of human intimacy and care that served their moment beautifully. That left the people in them better than they found them. That made ordinary time, the strange, domestic, pandemic slow time of cuddling and cheap wine and terrible television, I've started to think that some loves are like this. Not failed loves, not incomplete loves. Loves that were exactly what they were supposed to be, for exactly as long as they were supposed to be. And the grief they leave behind is not only grief. Somewhere in this world, I imagine, there is someone who still has a sweater that belongs to someone they once loved and lost. Not to tragedy, but to the quiet truth that what they had was real and wasn't enough. And they haven't returned it yet. Not because they've forgotten, but because the sweater is a small physical fact, a proof of something that happened, evidence that it was real, that the person existed, that the time existed, that the warmth was actual. Eventually, and this is important, eventually you return the sweater, or you fold it away somewhere, and the not noticing isn't forgetting, it's integration. It's the love becoming part of the architecture of who you are, rather than a wound in the present. The synapses still fire, but softer and less often. And eventually, with something closer to tenderness than pain, is for the better. I think it really is. And also, it was everything it was. And that's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually.